and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Marty Kendall is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his amazingly educational discussion on episode 170 on Boundless Body Radio. Marty is an engineer who seeks to optimize nutrition using a data-driven approach. Marty's interest in nutrition began 18 years ago to help his wife Monica better control her type 1 diabetes. Since then, he has developed a systemized approach to nutrition, tailored for a wide range of goals, contexts, and preferences. Over the past 5 years, Marty has shared his research at optimizingnutrition.com. He has developed Nutrient Optimiser and data-driven fasting to guide thousands of people on their journey towards health. He is the author of Big Fat Keto Lies, which clarifies the most common misconceptions and mistakes with low-carb and ketogenic diets. He also wrote Data-Driven Fasting Manual to optimize your fasting routine and to ensure you achieve your goals. He is the host of the Optimizing Nutrition Podcast, and we are so grateful to welcome Marty back onto our show. Marty, welcome back to Boundless Body Radio.
Hey man, great to chat again.
Absolutely. I've been very much looking forward to this since we hung up last time, and I feel like
it was a ton of fun. We had a lot of open loops, I think, to chat about.
Seriously, I'm super intimidated and don't know exactly what direction we're going to go in. I just know it's going to be very, very interesting and fun, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Before we get rolling, I do have to ask, I've been a little bit concerned about you. In our last, on our last episode, you invoked the wrath of the keto and carnivore gods, and I'm just wondering if you've like suffered through like a tornado of spinach, or if like a landslide of butter hit your house or something. Have you have you been affected at all by the invoking of wrath of the keto gods?
I've been okay, I think. I don't know. Yeah, I don't mind poking a few bears and attacking a few sacred cows occasionally when I think it's appropriate.
That's great. Well, we're glad to know that you are okay. That's really great. Before we dive into nutrition, I want to talk about something that you mentioned recently that I really love. Kind of a concept of like closing the loop and being really good at less things, or being very, very good at one thing. Can you talk about why you feel that's important?
Yeah, I suppose I've been on this massive journey over the last few months myself, just trying to manage like a day job and, my online avatar life, and trying to produce things and like just so many things in my head all at once. And I got to the point where my brain was exploding and trying to get everything done all at once at the same time. And I came across a dude named Cal Newport who talks about deep work and a world without email, and dove down that rabbit hole. And I don't know how I hadn't come across it before, but then discovered Getting Things Done by David Allen, which is an old productivity book. And in that, he talks about a 1920s study where they observed waiters in a restaurant, and the research was just amazed that, through the meal, the waiters could remember every intricate detail. It was their job, literally, to remember everything about that person and what they had for an entree and what they might like for a dessert. But then as soon as they paid the bill, they completely erased their memory of anything about that person and got on with the next thing. And sort of dawned on them that we have all this information floating around in our brain, but then when we close the loop, we shut it down and move on and can focus on the next thing. And like, the whole concept around closing the loop, getting things done is, full capture to say, I've got these ideas in my head. I'm going to write it down on a list. I'm going to organize that so I know when I'm going to do it. But I'm going to focus on one thing at a time. Like you can think of, if you've got a task, if you've got 80 things to do today, you really can't do all 80 at once. You can really think of it as a key. You can take that key off the out of the cupboard and go to that one thing. And then once you've done that, you put it back and take the next thing down and do that and put it back. And you get much more productivity, much more success when you focus on one thing. And our whole, world, advertising is designed to create, an inquisitive mind and trigger intrigue and create open loops that you're always obsessing about, and you want to investigate it more. And But, social media has just put that on complete steroids, that we're set up all the time to have, a million browsing windows open. You're looking at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, doom scrolling all the time, and you're completely overwhelmed with all this information. And I've found it really useful just to say, what's the one thing I'm doing now? I'm going to focus on that. And then once I've finished that, move on to the next thing. And just, I think that's really been helpful for me. But in the whole programs, nutrition and everything we do, it's the same thing again and again. When people get overwhelmed with too much information, even if it's all good information, their brains blow up and can't deal with it. And really, you're trying to train your amygdala, your habits, your lizard brain. And think of, you've got a pet cat and you've got 7 people screaming instructions at the cat. The cat doesn't understand English, and it's really hard to train to start with, which is a lot like our lizard brain. But, it can, or if you're training a dog, it can only take one new instruction, one new habit at a time. And then once you've done that, you move on to the next one. And you've got all these people with, your CGM, and I'm tracking my LDL, and I'm tracking my sleep with my Oura ring. And I had my genome sequenced with 23andMe, and I ran it through Prometheus, and I got this, 50-page report about all the genetic things that and their brains are exploding with information of what to do with all that. So in our programs, we just try to go, okay, let's do the most important thing now. Once you've mastered that, let's move on to the next most important thing. But you can only really master one new thing at a time.
Yeah, I love that. I subscribe to very few newsletters in my email, so I can keep my email inbox pretty lean. One exception that I make is for James Clear. And just yesterday, he had a quote in there that said, "Do less, keep returning to the one thing, and continue to refine it." And I think it's so wise. That's so great. We get so spread thin, like you said, with so many other things. We discussed this on the last podcast, but I think it's so important to understand that I would love just if you could re-explain kind of what is nutrient density and what is satiety, and how do those things relate to each other?
Yeah, I've learned a lot since we chatted last time about that.
Of course you did. Of course you did.
Yeah, I'm exploding with data and trying to analyze it. We actually downloaded finally 114,000 days of data from our nutrient optimizer of people tracking their macros and micros. And I've been, when I talked to Professor Rubenheimer and Simpson a few weeks ago, they said, have you done a multivariate analysis on that to understand, do the micronutrients play a role, as well as they're all about protein leverage and the role of getting an adequate protein and satiety and not overeating. So I've been diving into that. But satiety is just, we track calories and try to not overeat, but eventually we always eat as much as our body requires until we stop thinking about food and move on and do something else. So, as much as you want to restrict over the long term, if you don't change what you eat, you tend to continue to eat the same amount. And if those foods are hyperpalatable, low nutrient density, they don't give enough protein, your body, going back to Lizzie, your lizard brain, your amygdala, will just keep on seeking out enough nutrition until you get enough to survive, maybe not necessarily thrive, but you need to get through the day, and you need nutrients and energy to survive, basically. So, your super smart lizard brain will make sure you keep on powering on and get enough of those two things, nutrients and energy. But and satiety is the art of identifying the foods and meals that will help you not to continue to want to eat, what foods satisfy the nutrients you require without excess energy. And definitely the protein is the biggest lever in that. You need enough protein for your muscles and neurotransmitters and everything else that protein does in your body. But you also need vitamins and minerals, especially minerals, actually, that the multivariate analysis shows that a protein percentage is the first biggest lever, and then a bit of fiber tends to help to some degree, but really most people don't eat enough fiber to get a measurable difference. But then you've got potassium and sodium and all the other minerals, and to a lesser extent the vitamins and essential fatty acids that we tend to keep on eating until we get enough of those, and then we're satisfied and don't want to keep eating more. So I think the ultimate question in nutrition is how do you solve that adequate nutrients without excess energy, and what foods and meals will help you do that. So that's where all the data analysis and fun reverse engineering nutrition comes into play.
So one of the questions my wife and I ask each other after every week is, what is one thing you have learned or changed your mind about? So I'm going to ask you, what have you learned or changed your mind about since you and I last talked? Yeah, we love it.
Oh, wow. I don't know. It's a continual journey, and refining and just digging deeper into the data, and just understanding, I suppose, which nutrients in different contexts. Like if you're a low carb, what nutrients do you tend to crave more of, and what therefore have a greater effect on satiety versus low fat and low protein. And I'm just trying to understand the nuances of all those different scenarios to say, if you typically eat a low protein diet, then what do you need to eat more of? And if you eat a low fat or carnivore or different diets, what do people tend to crave and need to pursue more of those nutrients?
I think in the low carb world, I'm noticing that a lot of people are moving towards more protein than they had considered before. Like if you're following a true keto diet, it's a certain percentage of your calories is protein, which ends up being, maybe not so much. So how do you define low protein or high protein, or what kind of recommendations do you make around that?
Yeah. I suppose we always swing from extreme to extreme, and a classical therapeutic ketogenic diet is designed for epilepsy and Parkinson's and dementia, and you want elevated ketones. But if you're actually looking for fat loss from your body, you need adequate protein, and really elevated ketones is a symptom of losing weight and that's those ketones are coming from fat from your body. But just jamming in more butter and bacon and olive oil and MCT oil and exogenous ketones is not going to be necessarily a good thing. So just because adequate protein may lower ketones, if it does, some people find it does, some people find it doesn't. And it's not necessarily a good or bad thing to have more elevated ketones. So adequate protein tends to be maybe 1.8 grams per kilo lean body mass. It's sort of a good place to start, which is about that 1 gram per pound. If you're coming from a hardcore keto diet, you might be on 15% protein, and the high protein to energy might be 40-50% protein. But most people, if they go from 10 to 50 overnight, will just crash and they'll find it really difficult. But we're all about sort of, let's take it from 15 to 20 next week. And then if you can do 20 and you're not craving energy, let's go from 20 to 25 and keep on working up the line, only enough to keep on moving forward. And that's where a little bit of tracking can be really helpful, to reflect on how much protein am I getting? Where's my energy from fat and carbs coming from? What should I dial back? What should I dial up? And just sort of fine tune that balance. But I don't think there's a one size fits all prescription for everybody. You have to say, what am I doing now? And how can I move towards optimal? So there can be general rules, but I think the best approach is, what are you doing now, and how do you tweak it just a little bit to move forward and build those habits? Because just jumping to, from one diet fad to the next diet fad, from high fat keto to Ted Naiman as the Messiah, and I'm going to go super high protein, even he's finding that he's having to talk people down from the tree, because when they dial up to really high protein ratio because they want the results overnight, they're going, oh, I'm really hungry, because your body just can't get the energy it needs from the protein. So you just have to progressively tweak it in a sustainable manner for long-term results.
That's a question I was going to ask you, actually. Is there too much protein, and should the average person walking around really be concerned about that?
Too much protein? No. is the short answer. But if you live on chicken breast and kangaroo, you're going to get to the point where your body's craving more energy from fat or carbs, and it's really hard to convert the energy and protein to unlock that, to convert that to ATP. There's a really high cost of conversion. The high thermic effect of food, it takes quite a lot of work for your body. You lose 25 to 35% of the energy in protein just in that conversion, and you get hotter. You might even get the meat sweats if you go really hardcore, and it's just difficult for your body to do that. So if you jump, sure, if you're really obese and got a lot of weight to lose and really dial up your protein percentage, you'll be really your satiety will be really high per calorie, and that might be really good if you've got a lot of weight to lose. But if you're leaner and more active, and you're not going to fuel a marathon off chicken breasts and protein powder, because your body will be going, I just need the fat and carbs, dude. Just give me the energy. So you need to find that right balance. And again, not a one size fits all. Find out what you're doing now and just dial it a little bit in the direction you need to go.
So I remember a meal that I ate a few years ago. It was at some cooking class, and the meal was chicken breast and a small vegetable side. And I remember feeling like I was full when I left, but that fullness didn't last very long, and I was starving. I tore my kitchen apart that night, like eating everything. And so,
for sure.
Oh man, terrible. So that's kind of, see if you agree with this. I kind of tell people there's a big difference between fullness and satiety. And I can get full on certain foods, and my stomach will be full, and I'm going to stop eating. But I know that if I don't eat satiating foods, that I'm going to be starving in 2 or 3 hours. Where if I'm satiated, I can just kind of go about my day and do stuff, and it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah, and you need to find that right balance between nutrients and energy. You need enough of each. Most people need to dial back the energy a little bit from fat and or carbs. But if you just tried to live on chicken breast, it's the best thing for bodybuilders or the very lean protein for bodybuilders to lean out without losing lean muscle mass. But there's the saying, embrace the suck, for a reason, because it's not hard to be on that protein sparing it's not easy to be on that protein sparing modified fast extreme, because your body craves energy and it just doesn't want to lose body fat too quickly. And unless you're a competition bodybuilder, you don't need to put yourself through that extreme torture. You just need to find a lifestyle that's sustainable for the next 10 years. Is what I'm doing going to help me move towards where I need to be? Is it sustainable? Do I enjoy it? Sure, you enjoy eating donuts and cheesecake all day, but that's probably not going to lead you to where you want to be. But let's dial it back a little bit from between the Oreos and donuts, and somewhere between that extreme and the lean bodybuilder protein sparing modified fast. You just need to move one direction or the other. And the Twitter and social media are just full of all these debates about I tried the extreme chicken breast only diet and I was really hungry. It's like, that's just how it works. If you go to one extreme or the other, it's not going to be great. Or I ate nothing but suet for a week and I didn't feel hungry at all. It was like 6,000 calories a day. So, let's find some rational balance between the extremes and just move a little bit toward in the direction you need to move.
Yeah. I love that. That's amazing. I mean, I think you can pretty much ask anybody who did Atkins circa like 2000, where we were all, low fat and everybody was losing weight on Atkins, but like the whole planet was more miserable. Like everybody seemed to be really moody all the time because that's right. They weren't getting any energy. They weren't using stored body fat as energy. Super interesting. You've talked about this recently, and I want to ask, does the protein requirement that you need change based on your age? There's some thinking out there that says that you need protein as you're growing and then you need protein as you're aging, but then during the middle part of your life, you need less, which seems a bit ridiculous to me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Robin Homan seems to talk about that a little bit. And it's interesting. Like when you're growing, you need protein for growth, but you also need a ton of energy for your activity. So my son, who's playing rugby and riding to school and in the gym before and after school, and he needs a ton of protein, but he also needs a fair chunk of energy to fuel that and to grow with all the testosterone that's bouncing around his body at 15. In middle age, we're still fairly insulin sensitive and probably not so active. So you sort of go into a bit of a maintenance mode through that, between 25 and 45 or whatever. And if you're lifting and active, you're still going to need plenty of protein. But as you get older, we start to get insulin resistant, and the insulin, that just means that, insulin doesn't work as well. And part of the role of insulin is to keep your stored energy from fat, glucose, and protein in storage. So what happens when your insulin isn't working as well, gluconeogenesis sort of ramps up and you lose the protein you eat to glucose in your blood. So you see elevated glucose and you're not able to store muscle protein as well. So you really need to ramp that up even more in older age. And people who are older and less active tend to lose the appetite, especially for protein. And if they're in a nursing home, what's the cheapest food to feed people in captivity? It's not, high quality protein and steak. It's everything else. So people who are older definitely tend to need to emphasize protein more because they're going through sarcopenia and losing their muscle, and which is all related to metabolic syndrome. So yeah, stay active, eat your protein, especially when you're older. But I don't think you need to fear excess protein necessarily, because I don't think many people are actually overeating protein. You can, it's all about the protein percentage, not the, eat more protein from butter or bacon. It's about getting adequate protein from good quality sources that come with enough energy, but not too much. Because if you just ate, I'm getting more protein from bacon, you're going to overeat calories and get fat. So you just need to dial in that protein percentage.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. I love that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about data-driven fasting. This is something that was left over from our conversation last time that I wanted to make sure we dive down this rabbit hole as well. Tell us a little bit about data-driven fasting and what kind of turned you on to this idea.
There was a study from the University of Otago about 5 years ago in New Zealand where they did this hunger training using a blood sugar meter, which was really fascinating. And I wrote a blog post about 5 years ago after it came out, just people using their glucose to fuel to fine tune their meal timing. And I spend a lot of my day watching my wife's CGM go up and down and see when she eats more, eats less, and she's stressed, and you just see the different behaviors and how the blood sugar and insulin changes. So that's sort of a default language for me, which I think I'm blessed to have those insights. So 18 months ago, after doing a bit of heavy lifting and gaining a bit more fat than I wanted to, I thought, I'd devise a spreadsheet to try and guide my meal timing to be more disciplined, to only refuel when I needed to based on my blood sugars. And then I started a little Facebook group and shared it with some other people to trial it. And it just worked really, really, really well to basically, rather than worrying about as much your blood sugar after you eat, it's just, using your blood sugar as a fuel gauge to say, is it below what's normal for me? Yes, I need to eat. Or is it elevated? I'm not really hungry. I don't need to refuel. Or if I'm really hungry and the blood sugar is above your current trigger, then, all you need is protein and nutrients rather than as much energy. But if your blood sugar is well below your trigger, well below what's normal for you, then let's have a little bit of carbohydrate to bring that back up quickly so you're not consumed by hunger, and that usually drives you to eat hyperpalatable junk food, which is the fat and carb combo that we never stop eating. So rolled that out, and it's going really, really well. And 10,000 people in the Facebook group now, and we're running 7 challenges a year with about 1,500 people. in each, and it just works really, really, really well. People get really amazing insights from their blood sugar and go, yeah, okay, I understand what my body needs and how my body responds to the food I eat. Do I need to cut back carbohydrates? A carbohydrate's not an issue for me, and I just need to eat 2 or 3 square meals a day that are nutrient dense. And hey, when I eat protein, my blood sugar drops after I eat, and I can eat again more regularly, and I don't feel tired, I don't feel cold, I don't feel overly hungry. And when I came from people tend to come from that extended fasting more as better approach, and they fast for days because they're hoping for magical autophagy after 2 or 3 days of not eating, and then end up, face down in the donuts and pizza, or they're, keto and fasting, so they're just refeeding on butter and bacon, and that doesn't lead to optimal metabolic results in the long term if your body composition degrades. So yeah, it's just a really nice way of using just that minimal effective dose of data to help people to dial in their what and when they eat.
Well, you said something interesting, and you're right. Like and I would think this way too. Most of the time when we're looking at blood glucose, we're looking at it after a meal. So what a great idea to look at it before. Do you have a preference between, maybe a CGM, which is probably a little less invasive, but, sticks on your arm for a few weeks, versus sticking yourself, which, can kind of hurt, but do you have a preference either way?
Well, for people doing data-driven fasting, we just recommend by a simple cheap glucometer. Every couple of weeks, I put the CGM onto my wife, and people say it doesn't hurt, but she winces like hell and finds it quite anxiety-producing after wearing one full time for quite a while. So yeah, it's not, CGMs aren't low pain, and they're not necessarily accurate, especially the Libra, which you can't calibrate. So the Libra tends to read lower than actual, and just that excess amount of data. I love the data, but dialing in my wife's CGM has been quite a mentally demanding process. And then when people have the CGM, they tend to, I had a coffee, it raised my blood sugar by 3 points. Is that going to make me fat? Or, I had a sweetener in it. I was like, am I going to get fat on that? Or I exercised, or, I sneezed, and, they stress about every little blip on the CGM and lose the forest for the trees, that you just need to use the glucose to validate your hunger a couple of times a day, rather than looking at the CGM and saying, oh, it's below my trigger, I'm going to eat now, and they end up eating too much. So yeah, definitely less data is better. And I suppose from a cost, I think in America, you can get the CGMs funded by your healthcare, but they're actually very, very expensive devices that, that money that's being blown on healthcare funding could be used for insulin or other vital medications that people are dying without. So yeah, I'm a little bit anti-CGM just because it usually leads to paralysis by analysis.
Wow. I never thought I would be in the day that an engineer wants less data.
Well, again and again, like I wanted to be a biohacker back in the days of Dave Asprey and track everything. But, you can only keep it up for so long before you go, I've got other things to do in my life. And the more people we have through our challenges, the more you realize that they just need to dial in that one thing that works for them right now. And everybody gets overwhelmed by too much data. And even if they can keep tracking all the data, they don't know what to do with all that data. Yeah. So it's just about finding the minimal effective dose of tracking. Track something. Peter Drucker said you manage what you measure. It's important to measure something, but measuring everything all at once just blows people's brains up. And you just need to find that one thing that you need to track now, whether is it your waist to height, is it your pre-meal blood sugar, is it your protein percentage, is it nutrient density if you really want to level it up and dial in your micronutrition. But other than that, let's just track one thing at a time and manage that rather than trying to manage everything all at once, because you just don't actually make long-term progress.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I think that's great advice. I do not miss the days when I was back at the gym and, we had a little desk that I could work at that was right next to the body fat machine. And I would just cringe when the people would come in every single day and take a measurement. It's like, don't do this every single day. This is not going to tell you anything at all. You need to space it out a little bit and go chill out, go have fun, go paddleboard, do something else.
Yeah, and focus on managing the inputs, and the outputs tend to look after themselves over the long term rather than going, I gained 200 grams today because I didn't take as big a toilet visit as I did yesterday. And that's sort of, we always emphasize the negative more than the positive. So those negative bits of data that we judge ourselves on often lead to failure.
Well, okay, so interesting. You've collected so much data over such a long period of time, and I really appreciate that you make this so individual and unique for everybody. But with this many people and this much data, there must be a few patterns that have emerged that you've discovered from collecting all these people, their fasting numbers. So if you had to generalize a few tips of things that you've seen that might not apply to everybody, but maybe on a bell curve, they normally sit in the middle. What kinds of things have you learned along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. Protein percentage is the biggest lever in nutrition. Dialing up your protein percentage, people tend to eat fewer calories each day if they have a higher protein percentage. But as I said, there's a limit to how much you can do sustainably. Definitely then the minerals tend to play an effect. So you need to be getting enough potassium and sodium and a bunch of other minerals from your diet. And then going forward, just taking the simple insights from your blood sugars and tracking your food, if you want to take it to that level, can really be very enlightening. And we have really nice response over the long term as people just dial in what and when they eat using the minimum effective dose of data.
Do most people tend to be hungry in the morning, or is that a more optimal time to fast?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. A lot of people tend to not be hungry first thing, but then, they push their eating window back until later and tend to binge and overeat. So definitely, if you're a little bit hungry in the morning, then when that first hunger comes, try to eat more protein at that first meal, and then people tend to be less hungry later in the day. So we sort of emphasize, hey, if you're a little bit hungry in the morning, even if your blood sugar is high, you don't need fuel at that point. You just need protein. So that really helps smash the hunger and manage overeating later in the day. And if you don't eat as much as late at night, then your waking blood sugars are going to be better and satiety tends to be better. But you need to find the balance between, if you are someone who wakes up early and goes to bed early and you don't have any day job fixed schedule that you need to work to, you can be like you and eat early in the day and finish eating at 3, and that's great, but it doesn't work for everybody in the family routine. So you just need to find that balance that works for you and your family and your routine and your work. So you can't be hard and fast for everybody, even though that early time restricted feeding tends to work really nicely for people if you can implement it.
Gotcha. Interesting. You've already mentioned autophagy, which I find endlessly fascinating and super cool. I wonder if you can explain like what it is, and I understand that we don't have any really great markers to tell when we're in a state of autophagy. Do we know whether shorter fasts can be just as effective as like a 3-day fast to be able to activate autophagy?
Yeah, to be honest, we don't really know a lot about autophagy as much as you see all those little memes on Instagram and Facebook about, fasting for 2 hours does this, and fasting for 6 hours does this, and fasting for 24 hours does this, and fasting for 48 hours did this in a mouse study. But, that mouse study by Volta Longo, it doesn't take into account that one mouse day is 40 human days. So to get that same effect as the 40 mouse day fast, you've got to times your 40 mouse day fast by 40 human days, and how long you're fasting to get that autophagy effect, and how committed are you, and then what are you going to eat at the end of that fasting period. So to be honest, we don't know much about fasting and autophagy in humans, but what we do know is that having a lower waist to height ratio and less body fat and more power to weight ratio, and being stronger and having a lower body fat percentage and lower waking blood sugars are all really positively correlated with, lower diabetes and lower cancer rates, and just basically lower risk of any metabolic disease. So I think if you're going to manage anything, it's managing that, and let's find a way to, over the long term, achieve a better body composition, be stronger, be leaner, and you don't have to be a stage competition bodybuilder. You just need a waist to height ratio of less than 0.5 and a waking blood sugar of less than 100, and you're in a pretty healthy position from there, and everything else sort of vanity. So rather than worrying about magic autophagy that we honestly don't understand, the experts admit that they really don't know much about autophagy in humans, because you can't dissect them after 2 hours to see what happened the way you can mice. So we don't know is the honest truth, and I think it's largely distraction, and to believe that some 7-day fast was magical for you if you continue to do those 7-day fasts and end up binging on donuts or bacon after that and have worsening body composition over the long term. You're not actually helping your metabolic health as much as you believed in that magical autophagy.
Well, I love that you are able to pick through all the different data points and just focus on the ones that are really important and keep things really simple. On that note, I want to go back and talk about your book, Big Fat Keto Lies. I'm wondering, some of the things that you discovered, how you discovered them, and why you decided to write a book about it.
Yeah, I've just been on the journey with everybody else over the last 5 years of, we discovered low carb to help Moni's diabetes. My wife, Monica, is a type 1 diabetic, and getting off standard processed food and moving towards a lower carb diet that helped stabilize her blood sugars and insulin was magical. But then keto came along, and we all jumped on let's chase high ketones and eat more fat and need to be in the optimal ketone zone, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe we need to feed protein, and so we went down that rabbit hole, and then more of us started to find that, hey, the people with the better metabolic health have lower blood sugars and lower ketones, even if they're on a quote-unquote ketogenic diet. You just don't want massive amounts of energy floating in your bloodstream from glucose, free fatty acids, or ketones, especially all three at the same time. That's called diabetic ketoacidosis, and sort of a healthier place to be is, a lower level of energy in your body overall, that you've got enough but not too much, to the point the insulin needs to be ramping up. So, I worked out through the data analysis that, despite being told just eat fat to satiety, I took that as eat more butter, eat more bacon, eat more peanut butter, eat the MCT oil to get my ketones up. That was the worst advice, because fat is the least satiating macronutrient. So just trying to get that data out there to help people understand that, again, it's just having a healthy body composition, healthy waist to height ratio, which is not about eating more dietary fat to try and lose body fat. It's about dialing back both the carbs to get stable blood sugars in the healthy range, but not flatline, and then dialing back your dietary fat to lose, so you can use your body fat to move towards sort of a healthy body composition over the long term, which is just a satiety and getting nutrient density and enough nutrients so you can manage how much you eat without as much conscious restriction.
Mm. I remember back in like 2017 or something when I was first starting to coach low carb, and I got a text in the morning from one of my clients, and they were like, "Yeah, I couldn't get as much fat in my day as you told me to, so I just drank like half a cup of olive oil," and I had to stop and be like, "Wait a second, like I don't."
I'm writing this from my toilet, and I've been here for 3 hours.
Totally disaster pants for sure. Yeah. I mean, that was a really common thing early on. We were giving people recommendations for a certain amount of fat. And if you didn't get it, you had to eat more and more fat without realizing the fat's there. Like you have the stored fat. You just need to teach yourself how to use it.
Yeah. And you need to give your body the nutrients it needs. So it goes, there's no famine, there's no emergency of getting all the nutrition I need. I don't need to store all this, excess fuel tank battery that I've been carrying around. And your body goes, yeah, cool, I'll use that.
Yeah, you're saving it for a reason. It needs to come out. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the personal fat threshold.
Yeah, really fascinating work by Roy Taylor from the UK a few years ago that identified that some people develop diabetes when they're, more obese, whereas some people who get type 2 diabetes at a lower level of body fat, it seems to be related to a range of different factors. One of them is race. Southeast Asians tend to have lower muscle stores in the legs and tend to develop diabetes at a lower BMI, whereas, Pacific Islanders might gain a massive amount of body fat while still having great blood sugars, and then their body fat fills up to a point where it just can't take any more energy. And, our fat stores have this massive capacity to store energy from maybe 40,000 calories for a lean bodybuilder who's just finished a stage show, up to 500,000 calories for someone who's definitely way overweight. It's a massive amount of energy, but it's limited. It's like a sponge where eventually your body fat stores tap out. Your bum and your belly says, no, I'm big enough now. I just can't fill this sponge with any more energy from that diet you're continually throwing in your mouth, and I just can't store anymore. Sorry. So it overflows into the other parts of your body that are still more insulin sensitive, like your heart and your liver and your brain and your pancreas. And so you're no longer storing your energy in your adipose tissue. It goes into your visceral tissue, into your organs, which is a really dangerous place to be. And then once that's all starting to get full, it then overflows into your bloodstream, because the glucose has to be burnt off first, but then the glucose sort of backs up if your fat stores are over full. So, elevated glucose is really a symptom of having too much body fat, that all the energy is just being backing up in your system and then overflowing into your bloodstream. So that blood glucose is the first warning sign that the overall fuel tank from fat, carbs, ketones, alcohol, free fatty acids are all built up and blocked up in your system. So that's why glucose is a really good measure to know if from a moment to moment if your fuel tank is topped off. But the way to resolve the elevated glucose is to manage your body fat, which is the largest storage area.
It's just amazing, isn't it, to think about the human body, the systems that we have evolved with.
Incredible.
It's incredible.
I love it.
Yeah, your body is protecting you by trying to store up all of this energy that you're intaking, and it will continue to do it to protect you. And if you know your body fat percentage, you can calculate that number. You just reverse engineer, how many pounds of fat are on the body, and then you'll be able to tell how many calories of energy are stored on the body. And you're right. Yeah. Like I've seen that number get up to 500,000, 600,000, like huge numbers of energy that can be burned off. We opened this discussion talking about nutrient density. Can you explain like what the opposite of nutrient density is and some of the biggest offenders that are causing some of these problems?
Yeah, it's just hyperpalatable processed junk food that has low nutrient value per calorie. So that's really the refined vegetable oils and refined grains and sugars that are all smashed together with some artificial colors and artificial flavors and maybe some fortified vitamins, because the label doesn't look very good with the trash that's in there. And those foods are just the mainstay of our modern diet, which is amazingly fueled by, you asked me before what I've learned recently. I've been digging into the energy inputs into our food system and just the risk of, one day we will run out. I mean, a lot of people say we reached peak oil in 1980, and that's when we reached the limit of how much we could extract from the ground of oil, and really the oil and gas and all these easy fossil fuel, non-renewable resources have just been jammed into our food system through fertilizers and transport and irrigation, and in the near future, that's going to deplete. It's going to get harder to get, and it's going to harder to keep on just injecting energy into our food system, and it will change. But in the meantime, it's a party. For the last 100 years, the amount of energy in our food system has just skyrocketed, mainly from fertilizers created from natural gas that is just unique in our history and our population. We're growing more people and larger people, and it's just historically absurd, and it can't continue. So if you want to prepare for the future, it's to try and identify foods that are less reliant on the injection of cheap energy from non-renewable sources. Those foods will not just be better for the planet because they're grown in a regenerative environment, but they'll be better for you because they contain more nutrients and less energy that's artificially injected into the food system.
Yeah, one of our past guests, Leah Keith, wrote The Vegetarian Myth, and she talks about drawdown, how once you start taking more from the planet than it can give, the clock is running on that civilization. It's going to run out. It's just a matter of when. Kind of scary stuff. And what you were describing...
It is. It's ominous.
Yeah, it's crazy. And what you were describing earlier is like hyper-palatable foods and really poor nutrient density foods. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but you just described every break room in America. I mean, it's appalling, dude. I had to walk through the cereal aisle the other day, and it's like all of these bright colors and marketing and heart healthy, and like, it's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have exported your food system everywhere, so it's not just America now.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We also have to talk about something we talked about extensively last time, your NutriBoosters. I think these are amazing. You do such a great job with these. Can you just kind of recap what those are and tell us again kind of where that idea came from and what they can do?
Yeah, started with the satiety analysis and nutrient density analysis, and then trying to guide people through the masterclass and, hey, track your food, and here's the recipes that might help you. But we realized that what people really needed was, who are you, what are your goals, and therefore what food prescription do you need? And for people who are managing diabetes, like my wife, who don't necessarily need to lose weight, they just need a nutrient dense, lower carb version of that diet, which might be 30% protein and packed with as many nutrients as possible while still getting enough energy to maintain weight. Meanwhile, you've got people on a therapeutic ketogenic diet who need it for epilepsy and Alzheimer's. So we designed a bunch of recipes that suit those sort of goals while still getting as many nutrients as possible with a 70-80% fat diet for people who actually need that. But I think 98% of people who are following a keto diet don't actually need that. They need something more of a higher protein to energy ratio diet. So we've got, for people who are really hardcore, we've got like a 60% protein selection of NutriBooster recipes that are packed with as many nutrients as we can fit there. So we ended up with 25 different recipe books, and we're just finishing off the meal plans for that as well. So, some people histamine intolerant. Some people are concerned about oxalate. Some people want to eat a plant-based diet because they've got ethical concerns. Some people want to eat a meat-based diet. So yeah, we've worked through 2,000 or 3,000 recipes in Chronometer, and then sorted those, ranked by nutrient density for different goals, and then shortlisted that to 460 that are now embedded into our app, Nutrient Optimiser, which then you can track your food for a few days, and it'll tell you how you eat based on your goals. Here are the recipes and foods that you should try next, and then once you put those into place, here's the next challenge. And it just continually helps you dial in those harder to find nutrients, and they always come with plenty of protein, which helps with satiety, and then adding in the vitamins and minerals in adequate quantities really helps. It's sort of the icing on the cake to help people dial in their satiety.
I mean, we talked about this last time, but the pictures are incredible. The recipes are super easy. I would challenge anybody to spend like a week or two on any one of those plans, eating those meals, and then try to go back to eating what they were eating before, because I think their taste buds would change very, very quickly.
Yeah.
It's so delicious to eat that way.
We keep saying you can't unsee it. Once you've experienced nutrient density, once you've quantified your nutrition and seen the quantified nutrients in your food, you can't go back to eating that American trash that you were talking before that's all coloured and flavoured and has no nutrient value. It's just pure energy from non-renewable energy sources that are just, we're going to be Wall-E in no time. Yeah. Unless Elon can get us circulating the Earth in a rocket ship, or we can go to Mars and eat our own potatoes fueled by our own poo. I don't know how that works. I don't know what the nutrient content of Martian rock is like, and whether it's anything like Earth, but I doubt
it. That's amazing. I don't think I'd be able to afford the ticket anyway, so I'll be one of the bums stuck back here. Let me know what it tastes like. You're going to have to create a new NutriBooster for that one.
Yeah. How to live on Mars once we've fucked up Earth.
That's amazing. Dude, I love that.
It's one we haven't covered yet.
Exactly. Well, get on top of it. It's your $1 million idea. That's hilarious. I would love to hear a little bit more about the masterclass. I know you just kind of talked about it a little bit, but can you go in greater detail on how that works and some of the things that you offer?
Yeah, we've been running a nutritional optimization masterclass for the last 3 years. And it's another thing actually that we've realized, that 6 weeks to dial in macros and micros was a heck of a lot to take in. And so in 2022, we're looking at breaking into a 4-week data-driven macros and 4-week data-driven micros. So the process would be that you might try data-driven fasting, and then people would get a fair bit of progress, but eventually what you eat becomes critical to keep making progress, even if you've dialed in your blood sugars. So then data-driven macros would help people dial in their protein percentage and get the right balance between protein and energy, and bring down their carbs if required to stabilize blood sugars to healthy levels. And then we're building the data-driven micros, which you'll track your food. And then using the NutriBooster recipes, it will then guide you to, hey, try this one and try this one to dial in the micronutrient density. And then that'll be for the crazy people who want to gamify the nutrition and compete for 100% on the leaderboard, which people go crazy for. Other people just want to, dial it up sensibly and rationally to a sustainable level, but both are welcome, and it's a whole lot of fun. And like you say, you can't unsee that once you've experienced quantifying the nutrient density. And then after that, we want you to live a normal life without quantifying everything too much. Just come back and tweak it when you need to.
That's such a great approach. I love that. I really enjoyed listening to a recent episode of somebody who did the masterclass and achieved 100 score, and she did it on a plant-based diet. And, you know, again, I want to sit here and say that's going to invoke the rage of the keto gods or the carnivore gods, but she pulled it off, and she had really honest, specific reasons why she couldn't eat meat. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense. Culturally or, religiously, there's a lot of reasons why you need to eat a certain way. And again, you're just providing so many different options for people to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to be nutritionally agnostic, that you don't. I think a lot of the discussion gets bogged down in, red meat versus plants, and it's just so emotional, and then it becomes this clickbait Twitter war, and everything reverts to memes. But if you say, hey, are you getting the nutrients you need from the food you're eating in a bioavailable manner, then more power to you if that works for you. And Karen did an amazing job of, she eats a ton of cottage cheese to get a bioavailable protein, and then heaps of mushrooms and spinach and everything else. And she's gone from 30 years of obesity and going through cancer, and then she was fasting for weeks and weeks at a time on a regular basis under the best fasting gurus that you'd know the name of. And then she just was still hungry and not losing weight. But once she's eating nutrient-dense food that gives the body what it needs, again, the body just says, hey, I don't need this. We're not going through a famine anymore. We can drop all the excess stored energy. There's no emergency. And everything works itself out once you give your body the nutrients it needs.
Man, I love that. That's so cool. Love that you're able to work with people in so many different capacities. If somebody had to take a simple tip away from this conversation, what do you think that one tip would be?
Don't rely on Mars to save the planet. I don't know. Find one simple thing you can quantify. I think but even before that, you can start with avoid packaged foods that are a combination of refined vegetable oils, refined starches, sugars with food colorings and flavorings in them. If your kids can't pronounce the ingredients, they probably shouldn't be eating them, and neither should you. And then, that'll get you a long way down the track. And from there, you can start looking at pre-meal blood sugars and protein percentage and nutrient density if you really want to take it to the limit.
I love that. That's a great piece of advice. Marty, this has been another really, really fun conversation.
Thank you.
Always love chatting with you. Where can people go to find you and find your work?
Yeah, maybe data-driven fasting is a really good place to start if you want to just simply quantify when you eat using your blood sugar. We've got Facebook group and a bunch of stuff online. Just search for data-driven fasting and check out Optimizing Nutrition. There's a blog and Facebook group and Instagram and Twitter you can check out with all the NutriBooster recipes punched out every day. And yeah, we've got a NutriBooster Facebook group as well. If you want to check out those NutriBooster recipes and get some colourful inspiration about how amazing food can look and taste.
That's amazing. We will link to all of that in the show notes. It's really awesome to talk to an engineer who really appreciates data in high quantities, but can also distill down really simple ideas and make it very easy for people. And I really appreciate that about you. Thank you, Marty Kendall, so very much for coming onto our show again. We love learning from you. We look forward to lots of other conversations in the future, and we're looking forward to following your work for a good while to come. So thank you so much. We really are very grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Casey. Been a whole lot of fun. Thank you for letting me rant and rave.
Absolutely. And we just figured out the way out of our planetary problems. We'll just go to Mars.
Solved. The end.
Done. Well, thanks again. It was really a pleasure and an honor to host you.
Hey, thanks, buddy. See ya.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.